What is up, Collide? I got a question for you. Have you ever felt like someone is your enemy? I'm talking about people that are working against you. When you play sports, it might be the opposing team if they're playing dirty. Or when you're getting bullied, it could be the kid that's talking trash about you for no reason. When you fight with your family, it could be your siblings or even your parents sometimes. And it feels like we're in a corner and people are becoming our enemies at times in our lives. And I want to say, if you have, or maybe currently are, experiencing something like that, I'm sorry. Those times are brutal. There's no doubt in my mind. The question for us is, how do you respond? And really, there's two popular ways that people respond. Either they run or they retaliate. And I'll break those down for a second. The first one, running, is just avoiding other people. After whatever conflict you've had, you start to stay away from those people as much as possible. And that just means wherever they are, you ain't there. That's running. And then the other popular option is just to treat them the same way back. It's called retaliating, getting back at them. Whatever they did to you, you just do it right back to them, but even bigger. They roast you, you roast them back. They gossip about you, you gossip about them in the group chat. You hit back harder. That's retaliating. And many of us think those are the only two options. Either we run or we retaliate. But what if there's a third option? Actually, Jesus thinks there is. And in this series, we get to look at 3 of the prayers that Jesus prayed on the cross. And we're gonna see Jesus at his worst possible moment, responding in an incredible way. I wanna start with some background first. Jesus began to teach and serve people in a way that was different than anybody else, and the religious leaders at the time did not like it. Luke was a guy who saw personally a lot of Jesus's life, and he wrote down some of the things he saw. He wrote that Jesus taught with authority. He's doing wild miracles like healing people of blindness, getting paralyzed people to walk, healing people who had the disease of leprosy that was going to kill them. And Jesus, because he's doing these things, begins to gain more and more followers and clout. And soon, the religious leaders were getting stressed and pressed because of all the influence that Jesus had. But what does Jesus say about enemies? Because we're talking about enemies today. Well, he actually talks about this in Matthew 5, verses 43 to 46. So let's start in verse 43 together. It says, "You've heard that the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy." And pause here for a second, because Jesus is quoting what people at that time would have thought was the right thing to do with treating your neighbors. I mean, if they're nice to you and they love you and they look like you, act like you, and treat you well, then you should love them. But you should hate your enemies. That means hate anyone who doesn't treat you well. And at this point, everybody in the crowd was probably nodding their heads like, yeah, that's right, like, say that, Pastor. But then Jesus throws in what seems ridiculous to the people who were listening that day, and probably to us today too. He says this, "But I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And in that way, you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and to the good. And he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike." And he follows it up by saying, "If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even the corrupt tax collectors do that much." And this is a mind-blowing moment. If someone had been recording this, this would have blown up on first century TikTok. Every single Israelite's For You page would have been popping off with this clip. Because Jesus is saying, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. He is taking the bar and he's raising it. Jesus is challenging their thinking and he's challenging our thinking. He's making a statement that if we want to be followers of God, this is how we're supposed to respond. And in verse 45, he says, "In that way, you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven." You're going to see a bigger picture. You'll trust God is bigger than the situation or moment in your life. And you respond by loving and praying for the people who've harmed you, who've hurt you, and who have wronged you. So think for a second about your own life. Who in your life has harmed you, hurt you, or wronged you? Could be the kid at school that just won't leave you alone. All the time they're picking on you and pushing your buttons. Maybe they even challenge to throw hands with you. Could be the girl who won't leave you alone on social media, constantly gossiping or cutting you down behind your back, saying stuff that's just not true about you to your friends or people that you thought were your friends. Maybe it's the family member or family friend who you should be able to trust, but because of what they've done in the past, you just can't. And not only can you not trust them, you feel like you can't forgive them for what they've done. And I want to say, if that's you, I want you to know you are not alone. We love you here at Collide, and we want to help. If you're in a situation like this at home or at school right now, you need to know you can trust your group leader. They love you and they want to help you. Tell them what's going on. We want to help you be safe and help how we can. Because the sad truth is, there's some people that we cannot trust. And sharing what's going on in your life with your leader is the first step to helping make it right. And then here's the last example I'll offer for someone who might be hurting or harming you. It could even be your sibling. Someone that you're told you're supposed to love, and yet seemingly they're trying to do everything they can to make your life as bad as possible. Anybody ever been there before? Or any of those other situations? How is it possible to pray for these people? How is it possible to love these people? Jesus said, forgive, pray, and love them. But did Jesus actually do that? I mean, he talks a good game, of course, but does he walk it? Here's what I love about Jesus. Every hard situation we've dealt with, he's dealt with it too. Every pain and struggle that we've gone through, he knows what it's like because he's experienced that too. Jesus doesn't just feel for us. He took steps to feel with us. The question we're talking about today is enemies. Did Jesus have enemies? Well, Jesus faced betrayal from one of his closest friends, Judas. And that betrayal led to his arrest. And after he got arrested, his other closest friends abandoned him too. One of his closest disciples, Peter, openly denied even knowing Jesus. He said, "That's not my boy, I've never met him before." And then in Jesus' trial, there's a bunch of false witnesses who show up, and they start to lie about who Jesus actually was. The authorities had Jesus whipped, beaten, and then the crowd was convinced by the government to hand Jesus over to be killed on a cross. It was one of the most crooked and unjust trials in all of history. So, did Jesus have enemies? Yes, he did. But what did he do when those people wronged him? What did he do when he got harmed and hurt? When he had real enemies? He does the unthinkable. He follows his own teaching. Even as extreme and ridiculous as it might seem, Jesus prays for the forgiveness of those who are killing him. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Jesus walks it like he talks it. He's challenging our thinking by telling us to love and pray for our enemies. And then, in his worst moment, he doesn't just tell people to do that, he actually does it. Jesus loved his enemies by forgiving them even before they asked for it. Jesus led the way through what he taught and how he actually lived out that teaching. And as followers of Jesus, we need to start thinking differently about how we respond to people around us. The bar's been raised, and it won't be easy. But as you head to small groups today, here's the questions to ask. Who are you hiding from because you're afraid to pray for and forgive them? Or maybe who are you holding a grudge against and hiding anger in your heart for? And who have you recently let your anger out on because of the way they treated you? When you're betrayed by a friend, do you avoid them or maybe try to get back at them? Those are the expected and easy responses. Like, of course they'd run, of course they retaliate. But Jesus is calling us to act and think differently. The question is, are you willing to trust him and actually follow his lead? We love you. We'll see you next week.